Welcome to another episode of the Hoopsfix Podcast with me, your host Sam Nita, full-time British basketball advocate. Imagine being from a town of 100,000 or so, a little bit over that, and being able to produce players that have gone on to play internationally, professionally, and at the highest levels of US college basketball. That is exactly what Nick Drane, today's guest, has done. Probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves for developing homegrown talent. He has built a club to an incredible level down in Ipswich in Suffolk, and I thought it would be really interesting to get him on the show to discuss exactly what he has done and how he has done it, and that is what we did. Before we get into the show, always got to give a quick mention to our Patreon account. We are growing our subscriber base there. If you go to patreon.com/hoopsfix, that's patreon.com/hoopsfix. There you can sign up to give us much or as little as you'd like every single month to help support the work that we're doing. Podcasts like this, they cost money. Traveling around the country, going to games, all of that does cost money. And what we're doing is coming directly to you, our audience, to help us make greater contributions to the British basketball media landscape. So go and check it out, patreon.com/hoopsfix. Obviously, if you're listening on iTunes, please do take a quick minute to give us a rating and review. It's much appreciated and helps grow the podcast far and wide. And of course, if you want to give personal feedback, you can drop me an email, sam@hoopsfix.com, or you can reach out to me on every single social media platform @hoopsfix, and I will happily respond to every single one. Anyway, that is enough from me. Here is this week's show with me and Nick Drane. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It's awesome.
It's been a long time coming. So let's go right back to the start. You know, obviously there's a lot of stuff you're doing in Ipswich, which I do want to get into. But I think the obvious place always to start is kind of your beginnings with basketball and how you first got into the game.
Well, I don't think I have the traditional basketball journey. I'm not from a big city. I'm not from somewhere with a rich history of basketball. So I went to a high school in the countryside in Suffolk called Holbrook High School, and we were fortunate enough to have two members of staff at that school that were basketball enthusiasts. Bernard Ball, who's Michael Ball's father, and a guy called Garth McLean, who was the head of PE, who was a basketball referee at a very high level. So even though we only had 250 people in the entire school, one thing you did at Holbrook is you played basketball. It was very high on the priority list in terms of after-school clubs, and I played basketball at school, and I have two older brothers that also played basketball at school, and I just fell in love with the game. But there was no junior national league. There was nowhere really for people to play other than local league, and in your backyard. And really, I learnt to play basketball at school. Started playing local league men's when I was about 13 because I was a big boy, so I could play with men at a very young age. But I learnt to play in the backyard with my two older brothers and their friends, and I always made up the numbers, and I got the crap beaten out of me, to be honest, by my brothers and their friends, and kind of my fondest memories really as a player, really growing up, were playing in the yard with my brothers. And it wasn't until I was about 17 and I'd got pretty good, and they launched the Colchester programme, that I went over there and tried out for them, playing for Mark Lloyd, and Mark Lloyd utterly inspired me, and we had a junior team that included Tom Sadler, a guy called Simon Taylor, some really good players, the best players I'd ever seen from my little bubble that I was in little old Suffolk. And I thought, guys could dunk it. That was like an amazing thing for me, coming from playing in the garden and playing at school level and local league level. And I played for Colchester. And kind of the rest is history, really, for me, because that's when I got introduced to National League basketball. And so I started very late, but I was a big guy. I could move a little bit, slightly better than I can now.
What position did you play?
I was probably, in all reality, a 4. I'd like to tell everyone I could play the 3. But I became a better shooter as I got older, and the older I got, the better player I became. I was a much better player at senior level than at junior level. At junior level, I was a bit of a meat muncher. I set good picks. I'd dive on the floor. I was never afraid to roll my sleeves up and get stuck in, and that came from playing with two older brothers who would literally. I mean, I remember my brother punching me in the face because I scored on him. Like best thing that ever happened to me, by the way. but my two older brothers, I really owe it all to them in terms of my journey as a basketball player, and to Mark, because Mark took me in as a super enthusiastic Suffolk kid, and Mark kind of opened my eyes up to the real world of basketball, which was in this country Junior National League and then eventually Senior National League. So that's kind of how it all started for me, really.
And you did end up going to Canada on scholarship.
I did, yeah. It kind of happened by accident because I went to high school with a girl called Sally Kaznika, who had a great career as a professional player. She was part of the England team that won a bronze at the 2006 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne. And Sally went to the University of Winnipeg. She was a junior national teams player. And Winnipeg's women's team came over to the UK on tour, probably in, I think it must have been 99 or 2000. And I just, I was a 18, 19-year-old boy, and a bunch of athletic girls from Canada came to Ipswich. So I was, around them as much as I could be. And I just got talking to the coaching staff and was talking about how I'd started playing basketball and kind of got quite good quite quickly and really wanted to pursue it. And the next thing I know, I'm having email conversations with the coach. I send a film out and they recruited me. I didn't last very long. Again, kind of my naivety and lack of exposure to basketball at the highest level meant that I didn't stay in Canada for the longest period of time. But, I'm able kind of when I talk to people, and even now, to draw on those experiences as a player that came to the game late, had to work really hard, really quickly, relied on a great coach that inspired me, and then kind of the whole learning experience of trying to get out there and then not knowing what it was like once you're out there was something that I talk to people a lot about now.
So how come it was so short-lived? Was that because they didn't want you, or because you left, or?
No, I left. I left because I got injured. I'd been out. I was 20 when I went, so I was. I'd been out of education for 2 years, and I'd been working and playing for Colchester. So I was, I was working kind of 15 hours a week in a shop to fund my full-time training regime that I thought I was on at the time, and that kind of thing. And I got injured really early on when I was out there, and I was studying, and I was like, man, I hate studying. I'm out for like 8 months with a really bad ankle injury. I had a girlfriend back in the UK at the time, and I was like, I don't know how much I really want to do this, and I left, and it's something that was the best and the worst thing that ever happened to me, because I'd worked pretty hard to get there, and then it didn't kind of go the way I thought it would. But I didn't consider the academic side of things. I didn't consider the social side of things. If you're playing a lot of basketball but you're studying, and if you haven't studied for 2 years, and I was studying like these random subjects because they were like, we've got space on these courses, and I just didn't know anything about it. I wasn't educated. I hadn't sought out the opportunity to get educated myself, so I just kind of did it. I was probably there till about Christmas time, came back, but fell on my feet when I came back. So I was kind of, I don't believe in fate, but if there is such a thing, then I definitely had a stroke of luck when I came back, because I kind of fell straight into basketball development.
So that was, I was going to say, so when you came back, was your first job as the basketball development officer for Suffolk?
Yeah.
Right. And so you had already, by the time you'd come back, had you given up aspirations of playing professionally? Had you had in your mind, I want to get into this coaching thing, or like kind of what was your thought process, or was it just kind of just by chance you saw the job, you're like, basketball, I'll do that?
Well, I'd done coaching before I went away. I'd done some stuff with Mark, and for my sins, and something that it's now going to definitely be in the public domain. While I was playing basketball for Colchester, I was studying at Performing Arts College. I wanted to be an actor.
Okay.
It's where I met my wife, so people can mock me as much as they want, but the best thing that ever happened to me happened while I was at college. And Mark kind of always said to me, Nick, you're the best communicator I know. Like, you can stand in front of people and you can hold an audience, and you know the game, and you're going to be a good coach when you stop playing. So when I came back and there was a job in basketball being advertised, Mark was the one that kind of said, this has got your name all over it, Nick. And so he helped me. He was an enormous influence on me at the early stages of my career, and he kind of helped me with my application. And Suffolk Sport wanted me to apply. The manager of Suffolk Sport drove 3-hour round trip to get the application form to me before the deadline. So I was kind of quite confident that my application would be favourable, and Mark helped me get that job. And Mark had just taken a job working in Suffolk himself as a sports development officer. So, what then happened was that Mark became my host, essentially. So in Mark's office in Stowmarket, Mark then housed the county basketball development officer. So Mark and I shared an office. So for the first kind of 18 months of my basketball development professional career, I was working alongside Mark, who was at the time, a national team's team manager. Even then, had done that for several years, and he really kind of mentored me and talked to me a lot about kind of my potential in coaching. He encouraged me to go and do my level 3. He made me coach a Colchester junior team while I was still playing for the men, because I went back and played for Colchester after things in Canada didn't work out. And I've found, and I've always said this to people, I found when you play well, you can feel really pleased for yourself. You've had a good game. If you coach well, 12 people have a great experience, and that's kind of something that I still believe in today. That you stand to have a greater influence as a coach than you did as a player, and I find that quite satisfying. And that has obviously grown significantly now because I work with a lot more than 12 kids.
Well, what do you think made Suffolk want to have a basketball development officer? Like, why was there a push for basketball in particular in that area?
So Sport England launched an initiative called Active Sports, which was a national initiative. So it was being rolled out all across the country. So every county sports partnership had various part-time sports development coordinators.
Right.
So in Suffolk there was myself, there was a hockey, there was a swimming development officer. I think we had I think there was a tennis guy as well, if memory serves. And my way of doing that job was coaching. So I just literally drove around the county, going into schools and running like crazy taster sessions where I'd go in and say, well, I'll do 6 hours. I just, I need a break for lunch at some point and a coffee halfway through the afternoon. And I'd just go in and I'd be this performing arts student coaching basketball. So I was completely, mad with these kids, but they'd all leave like wanting to come to another basketball session. And that's kind of how it all started for me. And that was kind of the resurgence of basketball in Suffolk, because Ipswich has had, and I'm always very quick to point this out to people, Ipswich Basketball Club had a women's team that was launched in the mid-70s. So when people say to me, Nick created Ipswich Basketball Club, I'm very quick to say, actually, I didn't. I would say that I, with some other good people, kind of reinvented it and led its resurgence when it was kind of needed a bit of an overhaul. But I didn't make Ipswich Basketball Club.
So was it at that point when you were doing these sort of the taster sessions, coaching sessions, whatever you want to call them, was it that sparked kind of the thoughts of like, oh, maybe this coaching thing is what I want to do. This is where sort of career-wise, where I want. Were you still at that point potentially thinking, oh, maybe I'll go into acting or whatever, or how were you approaching it?
Well, I mean, the acting thing never even took off. I went to performing arts school because I didn't want to do A-levels, and I can play the piano, and I'd been in a couple of school productions, and let's not beat around the bush. I like being in front of an audience. I like being the centre of attention. Let's not pretend that I don't. And I went to Performing Arts College to kind of just figure stuff out. I was 16, but as soon as the Colchester thing took off, basketball was what I wanted to do. So as soon as I started the basketball development job, I was like, this is what I want to do. This is so rewarding. I mean, I'm that was nearly 20 years ago, and I'm as passionate about it as I was then. But I just find it so overwhelmingly rewarding and satisfying, and I've been very fortunate enough to kind of work my way up the ladder, I guess, if there is such a thing, and so as soon as I was in that county development officer job, because that was 20 hours a week, that job, and my first thing was I said to them, this needs to be full time, and they said, well, we don't have the funding, and I said, well, I'll earn it, and it became full time. And then one thing led to another, and.
So it was while you were doing that job that you founded Ipswich Tomcats, right?
So yeah, so part of the kind of the criteria for that job was to establish a pathway within the county. So Ipswich had, for many years, been a very successful women's programme. But at that point, Bernard, who was my school teacher, was also the guy running Ipswich. Bernard had retired. His son, Michael, had moved on. Michael, I think, coached in Australia for a time and then was back in the UK. And he was down in Solent. And so Ipswich, while it was still functioning as a National League programme, at that point only had a junior team. They no longer had a senior women's team. So kind of one of the things was, in addition to raising participation and interest and all that kind of thing, is we need a pathway locally. So that's when we launched the Tomcats as they were known then, and we launched the Tomcats, I think 03, 04 maybe. I think it was 03, 04. We launched the Tomcats. It might have been 04, 05, but we had a year of it when it wasn't competitive, so we were just training. And again, I just loved it because I was getting to coach, not just inspiring kids and enthusing kids with a crazy taster session, but actually teaching these kids how to play basketball and to kind of developing their skills. And so we launched the junior boys program and kind of relaunched the junior women's program, and we went from having under 14 boys to the following year 14s and 16s, the following year 14s, 16s, 18s, the following year I think we then had under 13s, under 14s, under 16s, under 18s. And then Catherine James came along, who is Bernard Ball's daughter, Michael Ball's sister. And I moved on to a different role, and Catherine inherited my old job, so the county development officer. And then Catherine did the same thing. She was like, right, I'm gonna sink my teeth into the junior women's side of things. And suddenly Ipswich was, had like 6, 7 junior teams and a demand for a senior team. We started producing some decent kids. Lee Greenan is probably the highest profile boy that we produced in our early days, and I sent Lee off to an academy, and then we had Dylan Johns. He came along, and we sent Dylan off to Barking, and then we sort of all sat around and said, we keep sending these kids to academies. Why don't we look at an academy? And that's kind of how that evolved. And I'm racing off here, Sam.
So it's very easy to sort of reflect on things and say, okay, like first year we had under 14s or whatever, then we did under 16s, under 18s. But actually that process of how that happens, like how does that happen? Like you have to have the demand from the local area, right? You've got to have the kids that want to play basketball first of all to be able to actually have the teams. So I think it'd be really interesting to kind of explore that, like how, you're starting from scratch. You've obviously, I assume, have built up a little bit of a network from doing the job that you've been doing. But where does the demand and the interest grow from? How do you create that?
I think what we did, and I think what I would advise other people to do, is you've got to develop relationships with schools. So you've got to get into the schools, and you've got to go into a school session with the attitude of, right, I'm not here today. I mean, it's a bit of a sales pitch, to be frank. You go into a school and it's not, I'm going to, in the 1 hour that I've got with these kids, they're all going to get better at basketball. It's got to be in the 1 hour that I get with these kids, as many as possible of them are going to go, man, that was fun. I want to do it again. And I've always said, whenever I tutor and whenever I talk to young coaches and whenever I sort of induct coaches into our club, I always have this philosophy is their hour with me is going to be the highlight of their week. And I still have that attitude today. Working with the best kids that I have is the best part of their week is going to be playing basketball with me. So I'd go into a school because I don't work in the primary schools anymore. I have people that do that for me. But go into the school and get as many of those kids in those schools to come to a community session where it's just fun. It's fun. And we give them a T-shirt and we give them a wristband and we give them a ball and we say to them, this you're going to be really good. Stick at this, and then before you know it, you then go, right. Well, do you know what? We've got 40 kids in a community session. Let's have an under 12s team, and you have an under 12s. We have an under 12s team, and we've got 35 kids in it. And then of that 35, 25 of them go into under 14s, and then 15 of them go into under 16s, and that's how we did it. It was very much with the attitude of inspire them in the first instance. A kid that's never played basketball doesn't care about his hand position on a jump shot. What he cares about is the association of enjoyment with that session. Yeah. So taking a kid who doesn't enjoy something and tell them that they're doing it wrong, they ain't going to do it. Take a kid and make them love it. And once they love it, then you can say to them, right, do you know that if you did that off your left foot, it would be the right way to do it? Or do you know if you hold your follow through, it might go in a bit more, or something like that. So that's how we did it. It was all about getting personality into the sessions. And then from there, you can then teach the game. No one does anything. Very, very few people do anything that they don't enjoy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So association of passion, fun, enjoyment, love with our sport, and I have that everywhere I go. So I don't take that for granted either.
Yeah. Would you say that 16 years later, since you first set up the club now, if you were to stop doing the primary school sessions, that there's enough of a sort of culture and awareness of basketball that kids would still come in, or do you think that that's something that you have to continually do over time forever?
I think you need to be in the schools from a talent ID perspective now. The difference is we've got a brand and a reputation locally. So if I write to a head of PE, they reply. And that's kind of something that I know is a bone of contention in the basketball community. Is getting into the schools in the first place is really hard. I've reached kind of a point where I sit on various committees in the school environment. So the Ipswich Primary School Sporting Association, I sit on that committee. I have very good links with the school games organisers, that kind of thing. So if I need to get information out, it's pretty easy. What I would say is, when you go into the primary schools, that's the time where you see, a kid for the first time, and anyone who's coached for a little while, or even if you've not coached and you've just been around basketball, you can spot a basketballer at 8 years old, 10 years old, and again that comes back to the association with love, passion, fun, enjoyment. So I think that you need to be in those schools because most of the best kids are already playing another sport. So we kind of got to nick them from those sports in some respects. And so you see all the time, she does athletics, or she plays football, or he plays football, or he does gymnastics. And okay, right, we're gonna make them love basketball more in order to get them to play our sport. And so I think that's why you need to stay in the schools and never take that part of the kind of the process away. It would be really easy to just send out information of our under-14s trials and assume that we're going to get the best athletes to those, but you might not.
Do you feel like when I look at your club, clearly you're doing things from a bottom-up approach, and you're making sure you've got the foundations in place to then have the entire pathway. Do you feel like we've got too many clubs that are, they're just taking care of the top? They've got, maybe one National League team, and they don't actually have anything underneath feeding into it. They're kind of approaching it the wrong way rather than, getting your base, getting your foundations first. I think you could, in some ways you could say that's going all the way through to BBL clubs in some cases, where they're not doing a good job of the getting kids to love the game first, developing the talent, and then, being in a situation where you've then got players in your senior team that have come through the entire program.
Well, I think everyone's got a different agenda, and I think it would be naive to not be aware of that. And I think that's one of the things. And there's a lot of people talk about their frustrations. No one probably more than me in terms of what happens and what goes on in our sport. One of the reasons why we do it our way is because we had to, because we didn't have that top end of the tree to start with. So we did it a certain way, and it's been very successful and very rewarding. So we now haven't changed it. Other people will start at the top and work their way down and create that brand and have people, sold on the brand rather than the sport, and do it that way. There's no right and wrong way. My argument will always be doing it our way creates more basketball players. And that's what our sport needs, male and female in particular at the moment. We need more basketball players. So the best way of doing it is having as many programs that have multiple age groups, both male and female players. There's many kind of pairs of hands working for that end goal of creating basketball players. I don't blame programs that have a pro team or a D1 team or whatever, and assuming that everyone will come to them. I don't blame them for doing that. I just think I can only speak for the way I've done it. The way I've done it is overwhelmingly rewarding. I can't really articulate how much pride there is in coaching someone when they're 9 and then having them either play for your senior team or go off to the States or go off and be successful at a British university or come and get a job in basketball. Like our physio at our academy was a girl that played under 12s, 14s, 16s, 18s, went off to uni, come back and is now the physio. You know, I cannot put into words the sort of sense of pride I feel in her journey and her success.
Yeah. Do you find, have you had other clubs, you know, people starting up or trying to do their own thing come to you and ask you how you're doing, what you're doing? Do you think there's an awareness of the fact that, you know, Ipswich is a population of 120,000-ish, and you're having success on a national level at pretty much every age group, boys and girls, doing very well? Like, you know, for me, it's like clearly there is some type of blueprint there that really could be applied elsewhere in other parts of the country, which are maybe a little bit more remote and don't have the raw athletic talent that London has or whatever. Do you find, you know, people have come to you and ask you for advice, or have you looked at trying to help other areas rolling out their own sort of clubs or programs?
There are people that have come to me. Not enough, I don't think, but then maybe that's my ego talking. You know, Stuart Kellett came to visit us in October.
Boss winning CEO.
Yeah, with a kind of a view to looking at, well, if they can do it, surely anyone can do it. Various kind of people have emailed me over the years and called me, but I got a lot of what we do with our club from Matt Johnson at Reading. I modelled a lot of what we do on what they do. He's been a massive influence on me and as a consequence our programme. I did a presentation at one of the ACE meetings about 3 years ago to the ACE coaches on how we, because there's more than one way to skin a cat, how we have been successful in developing a junior programme, and then as a consequence of that, kind of the fundraising that we've been able to do, the sponsorship that we've been able to attract, all that kind of stuff. So I talked about kind of how we built this big program, relatively big program in a relatively unfashionable in terms of basketball part of the country, and I've seen some things that people are doing that I guess may have come as a consequence of that presentation. I also see people that have worked at Ipswich at one stage or another, either professionally or as a volunteer, and take some of what they learned from us, and are doing great things. I mean, Matt Harbour, I don't know how many people know that Matt Harbour played for me and was my assistant for a couple of years and was very much my protege, and in his early years at Loughborough would call me all the time, and I would say, you know, Loughborough is very different to Ipswich, that's for sure. But, you know, there are certain kind of things in terms of building a club culture that I think that were taken there. Adam Davies has had a huge influence over at Canterbury. You've got, Tom Sadler's doing some good things over now with Colchester basketball over in Essex. So that's kind of, there's definitely a legacy from people that have been in the programme. I would welcome conversations with anyone who wants to start a basketball club or develop their current basketball club. I'm not convinced the Ipswich model would work in big cities, but I do think that there are pockets of talent dotted around the country that, you know, Norwich, for example, there's not been loads happening in Norwich, and they've got an amazing basketball facility in Norwich at UEA. You know, if you can do it in Ipswich, you can do it in Norwich. You know, I would be very keen to sort of support people in developing these things. And my phone's always on and my email's always on, so I'm happy to help people if they want to be helped. Yeah.
So if it was your job to help the UK, you know, in fact, I was actually having a conversation with someone the other day about, obviously we're doing all the selection for the Hoopsfix All-Star Classic at the moment, and just talking about the depth and the lack of depth that we have, like, especially when you're talking about national teams, you know, the moment you lose your best players, like, the drop-off is pretty steep after that, and I think that's where we differ to a lot of other European countries where, you know, they lose a couple of their top guys. It's not the end of the world, because they have other players that are very, very capable as well, and we just don't have the depth. So if you were responsible for, you know, helping England or the UK grow its base of talented elite basketball players, you know, how would you look at it? How would you approach it? Would it be a case of starting in the schools and going out from there, or would you do something else?
I think you have to start in the schools, but you have to start in the primary schools, not the secondary schools. I'm talking about getting into getting into the schools when these kids haven't chosen their sport yet. Other than football, no other sport really discourages multi-sport activity at a young age. So my thing would be get into as much primary school activity and get as many kids bouncing a ball and associating bouncing a ball with enjoyment and fun, and widening the base of the pyramid. One of the things as well is you've got to have the right personality working with those younger age groups. I think at the really young age groups, I'm talking 10-year-olds, the inspiration is more important than the technical delivery. And I know that will be an unpopular opinion, but once a kid loves something, they'll then buy into the technical side of things. It's getting, if we've got 300 kids playing basketball in Ipswich, the percentage versus our population is pretty good compared with other areas of the country. That would be my thing, is if the Solent model or the Ipswich model, Solent do just as good a job as we do, and it's another part of the country where they are not able to just go, right, let's run a trial and there'll be 50 kids show up. You have to create the demand for that first. So that would be my thing: create a demand, nationally, and there's a million different ideas, but I think you've got to get the right personalities in front of these kids to inspire them. And the two things that kids will be inspired by are someone's personality or someone's physical presence. We used to send Lee into primary schools, Lee Green, and he didn't have to have a...
And he's a 7-footer, just for people that don't know who he is.
Yeah, and built like, built like a superhero. So he'd go in his GB tracksuit, and I'd do all the talking. And Lee would just stand there and hand out T-shirts, but everyone wanted Lee's autograph, and everyone wanted to be like Lee. And that's the other thing you can do, is generate local profile that doesn't have to be... I've had people make fun of me because we make make players into kind of mini local celebrities. But then when you send that person into a school and they inspire 30 kids to play basketball, then that's worked. And don't we need to kind of put our success stories up on a pedestal for people to aspire to be? We have Harriet Wellham in Ipswich, who is a complete inspiration to everybody in Ipswich. Now, she's not going to play in the WNBA, but in our programme, she is... I would doubt that there is a more singular, important role model in any programme in the country than Harriet is to the girls in Ipswich Basketball Club. But we've put her on that pedestal, and we've built her kind of image around that, and that's benefited her enormously. She now works in the game. So now we send her into primary schools, and that inspires people. And I think that you get people saying, "Oh, yeah, you shouldn't tell people they're too good," or anything like that. No. We're trying to grow the game.
100%. Obviously I grew up in Eastbourne, which is very small as well. And Brighton Bears was the local club growing up, which was a 45-minute drive away. But I know as a player, I had my friend's older brother, a guy named Sam Paculabo. He was kind of like the local legend. He was on the bench of the Bears when he was 17, and there was Bud Johnston as well. He was 17 years old, and he was on the bench there. And those were the guys that were like, we want to be like them. Of course, you have your NBA inspirational role models as well, but I think the power of the local role model cannot be understated. And interestingly, it's funny when you talk about sort of smaller rural areas. Yeah, there is sort of downsides. You can't just put up a poster for a trial and loads of kids show up. But on the flip side, I'm sure I've said this before on the podcast, but the fact that you're local means that there's not as much going on. So it means that getting local press coverage, for example, becomes a lot easier than if you're in London. There's so many. My brother-in-law runs a triathlon in Eastbourne, which every single year would get so much local support because they don't have a triathlon in Eastbourne. It's not something that happens a lot. Where with the Hoopsfix All-Star Classic, we're just another basketball event in London. It's very hard to get press, TV, newspapers, whoever down to cover it. So there are all sorts of benefits to being small. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, absolutely. We in our neck of the woods, you've got us and you've got Ipswich Town Football Club, who just got relegated. So we're the local sporting good news story. We're incredible. We don't have to fight for attention too much because what we're doing is legit and what we're doing is genuine and to a degree very successful. People want to write about us. People want to write checks for us. People want to come and watch us, come and support us. There's something very romantic about the local team doing well. We don't have a we have a rugby club, we have a hockey club, etc., etc. But our women's team won Suffolk Team of the Year, which we made a huge fuss about. And again, people sort of send a couple of texts, playing it down. I'm like, cool, but we got a sponsor out of that. And it's whatever your situation, and you can turn it to your advantage. We love the fact that we're, that there's nothing for 50 miles in any direction. I mean, our nearest city is London. Do you know what I mean? So, in terms of we're self-sufficient, and so our under-14 girls did a radio interview yesterday because they got to the Final Four. How often is that happening around the country? That's great for basketball. That's great for the profile of basketball, and I believe that can be replicated anywhere.
Yeah. Do you, in terms of the promotion thing, like I see, obviously I follow you guys on social media and stuff, and I see the amount of press coverage you get locally all the time, doing interviews and whether it's just game reports or photos in the local papers. Is that something that you actively have to push to make happen? Like, how is that? I'm trying to think of it. If I'm a club in an area and I've never had press coverage before, and I want to grow my audience and my fan base, and I want to try and get some local press coverage, is it something that requires real effort every single week? You've got to make a phone call to the journalists. You've got to put everything there for them. You've got to send them the photos. You've got to send them the report so they can just reword it a little bit, give them a headline, and then they can run with it.
I would say that you've got to have a product that they want to write about, ultimately, the product in this case being basketball. But I would also say that newspapers, like we have a slot on a Tuesday in the local newspaper, but we have to get everything to them by 1 o'clock on a Monday. So we have a press officer at Ipswich Basketball Club who's a volunteer. And I think that's something I'll come back to, is the importance of volunteers. We have a press officer who gathers a short sentence sent on a WhatsApp group by every junior team, and it has to be sent by 10 o'clock on Sunday night, so the press officer, by 9 o'clock on Monday morning, before he goes to work, has written the weekly wrap, and the weekly wrap goes to the local newspaper, and it goes to the local radio. So every week we're guaranteed that coverage. We're also guaranteed a page for our men and a page for our women, and that's been built up over time. But one of the things as well, and you might correct me on this, Sam, because you're far more of an expert in this than I am, people will interview interesting people more than they'll write about interesting stories. So I got a phone call when Iceland knocked England out of the 2016 European Championships. I got a phone call from the radio to do an interview about football. I know nothing about football, but they knew that I'd be really opinionated, and they knew that I'd probably say something that a football expert wouldn't say, and then they could use that as a soundbite. And I've said things, in the newspaper, bold, brash statements about this player's going to be the best player in the country. I remember telling people, watch Lee Green, and he might play in the 2012 Olympics. And they hung on to that and followed Lee's career. Now, in another lifetime, Lee might have done that. It's not that unrealistic of a statement. I talk about junior players in our programme at the moment, and we're fortunate to have several that I think are real top-end prospects. And then people want to follow them and write about them and write about their journey. And I think you do have to build that up over time, but you've got to be of interest. And one of the things that Lloyd Gardner gives me grief about all the time, a very dear friend, is how I self-promote. And it's ironically, anyone who knows me personally knows I'm actually trying to get to the point where I don't have to self-promote, that someone else will promote us. But I just believe if I remember Aaron Mosley rolling his ankle in an under-18s game and it being on the back page in 2008. They wrote a back page story about an under-18 player. I think we were in the conference at the time. He's injured. He's the captain. They've got a big game coming up. But, I was like, well, Aaron's going to be a good player. He's going to be a good senior player. He might go to the States, yada, yada, yada. And they go with it because it's of interest, because we've become interesting. But I also just got to talk so much, Sam. I think people ring me when they need a story.
In terms of the press coverage and the media coverage, how much does that play a role in terms of the sponsorship that you're able to raise? it would be quite interesting to talk about fundraising. I'm not asking you to necessarily give figures, though. I'd be very interested in if you would be willing to give figures. I know we've spoken privately about sort of money that you've raised for the club and stuff, but when you talk about sort of making it sustainable, having sponsorship, like I said, the fact that you've shown up in a car outside that's blue branded with Ipswich basketball over it, that's part of one of the sponsorship agreements you have with a local car vendor or whatever. Like, how are you doing that?
Part of it comes back to this kind of lack of local competition, I would think. I think we're a good news story, Sam, and I think that we're very active on social media. We're very visible in the community. I'm very visible in the Ipswich community. Like when I was working with Carl Brown, he used to give me so much stick about, like, if we went out for dinner, we'd get a discount because the Ipswich basketball guys are here, and he used to say the BBL guys don't get this, and I was like, well, that ain't my fault. The sponsorship, some sponsors' agenda is that they have a corporate social responsibility budget that they have to spend, and they have to be seen to invest in the community. So what you do is you go and what you don't do is write an email. What you do is you go and knock on their door. Or you go to a business breakfast, and I go to business breakfast and do presentations about our program, and I give case studies on success stories. So I did a whole presentation to a corporate event, and I talked about Veronese, and I talked about a kid from Ipswich. This has been his journey, and at the time I was like, and now he lives in Rome, and this weekend he played against Real Madrid. And without investment from local businesses, those things are not possible. And of course, it got a big round of applause, and about 3 other businesses then come up to you and say, we'll have some of that because we like that speech and we like that story. You get other people that want to, they're very shrewd business people. So we have a great relationship with Turner's Hyundai, who are our principal sponsor. I drive around in a branded Turner's Hyundai car, which works for me, but he's sold like 50 cars to members of our club. So, it's a very much two-way relationship. Yeah. If you go to Coppleston on a Saturday when there's a senior game, it's like a Hyundai showroom. It's hilarious. But that was a mutually beneficial arrangement. We have sponsors. We do little things like we do player sponsorship packages. So we'll say, rather than our players paying to play for the club, I'm talking about senior players, it costs X amount of £1,000 to run a senior team, of which we're going to hold the players accountable to raise £3,000 of. So it costs 200, 300 quid to sponsor a player. It might be 300 quid to sponsor Harriet Wellham. It might be 150 quid to sponsor a less high profile player. And people are fighting over them. Like we've had bidding war for player sponsorship. It's hilarious because locally we've made them high profile and they've earned that profile. So, when we were at one point when we were in Division 2 with our men's team, when we had Greenan and Sadler and Josh Johnson and those guys, we raised, between fundraising and corporate investment, we had 25 grand a year, which I was told was more than GB were getting in terms of
that doesn't surprise me.
In terms of investment. And we invested a lot of that into the junior program. We invested a lot of that into coaching. We invested some of it on the players.
Yeah.
So it can be done. But again, it's a bit like going into those primary schools and having that personality to inspire people. I'm very good friends with some of our sponsors as a consequence of them sponsoring us. I'll go and speak at their events. I'll go and, Hyundai hosted a celebrity cricket match, and I was a VIP at this thing, and I'm sitting there with Monty Panesar, the cricketer, and having lunch with Monty Panesar, and it's great, but it's beneficial for Turner's Hyundai to sit there and say, now Nick's from the basketball club that we sponsor, and they've got X amount of internationals, and they've got all these kids that have played in the States, and you tell the story, and it's very true about the kind of the life-changing things that have happened as a consequence of playing basketball and being part of a basketball club. And so it's, in our world, we can't, Ipswich is too small for you to lie and kind of to sell something that's not true. because people talk, and the community's so small. So we're just quite genuine and quite legit, and we've had 350 people in Copleston, which is a school gym, for a Division 2 men's game. We had a Division 2 women's playoff game last year with 250 people in, beating drums and climbing up the climbing wall because they can't see the cook. It's nuts.
Even when I remember when you hosted the under-20s in 2013, I think it was.
Yeah, 2013.
And like you've managed to bring out like a huge crowd. And for the under-20s, they're not, especially if they're playing games here, which is rare anyway, but if they're playing games here, they're not playing in front of a crowd, and you brought out, I don't even know how many people were there, but the stands were full. It was a packed gym.
I think we had 400 people in there, because I remember the site manager telling us that we'd broken the fire safety regulations.
So it's awesome, and it does show kind of what's possible. I think in some level it's just about being intentional about what you're trying to do and actually looking at where you're trying to get to and how to really do it, rather than just going through the motions like, oh yeah, I'm going to have a basketball club, But then on the flip side of that, the facilities thing, do you feel like that's really holding you back in terms of how much you can grow as a club? Because ultimately you can only sell a certain amount of tickets because you're going to break those health and safety regulations, So if you want to go into Division 1 or, I don't know whether you've got BBL, WBL aspirations, it'd be interesting to talk about that maybe. But yeah, like how limited are you by the size of your gym?
Very. I mean, I do a summer camp every year. Last year we had 118 kids
in the one gym.
In the gym, and so we have a second gym, but it's like one of those tiny little school gyms where you can shoot a three, but you're in the other half.
Yeah.
So I'll do my summer camp, and we buy some portable hoops and we put them outside, and we turn the dance studio into like the funny thing is our summer camp is like. Ethan Price and Esther Little this summer are like, can't wait for summer camp. I'm like, haven't you outgrown that yet? No, it's the best week of the year, because we have them. They have to run from this place to that place, and it's just they're all over the school site basically on this basketball camp. But it does hold you back in terms of what you can do developmentally. I kind of feel that we get punished locally because we're so successful with the means that we have. No one's kind of there thinking, right, let's help Ipswich. Let's do something for them. Because I'm kind of the opinion of, if we had a double court, I'm not really interested in an arena. If we got an arena, great. But right now we're a Division 2 men's team and a Division 1 women's team. I'm not interested in filling 2,500 seats. What I'm interested in is having two courts so I can have two teams practice at the same time. Or instead of having 40 kids in a community session, I can have 80. And instead of having 118 kids on a summer camp and capping it, I can have 250 kids, and do you know what I mean? And at the high level for the academy, having girls and guys practicing, instead of having girls go for an hour and a half and then the boys go for an hour and a half, maybe you practice at the same time because you've got a double court, and your shooting sessions can be of a higher quality because you're not on 2 rims, you're on 4 or whatever. So yes, it does hold us back, but I do think that people sometimes look at us and go, but they're doing all right, so we'll focus on somewhere where the need is greater. Whereas I think that, if we had like I say, just a double court, my dream is that something like the facility they have at Oaklands, I think it's gorgeous, and it's exactly what we want. But I also get very frustrated when people talk about facilities and say that that's the starting point to being able to run a program. You can run a program on an outdoor court if the people doing it are good at it.
Yeah, 100%. I always said that the big piece I did on facilities, I think I made the point at the end that is ultimately, yeah, of course, it's a big part of the growth of the sport. But really, if you don't have the right people sort of managing that facility, running activities out of the facility, it's not going to make it one iota of difference. Have you had conversations with the local council or anyone about trying to make a double court anywhere? Like, is there space? Like, what?
I think it's the going back to the kind of conversations about the local press, probably the single biggest and most often asked question is, what do you need? What do you need? And I bang my head against a brick wall with it. We've had various meetings with the council over the years, with Basketball England, with Sport England. We've talked about just knocking the wall down in Copleston, just extending the gym, and and the cost of that is, a drop in the ocean compared with some of the grants that are being handed out. There's an initiative coming along in the local area in the next 18 months that we're hoping to kind of I'm going to push myself into that that conversation and get myself into those meetings. But we that's probably the weakest part of my skill set is the understanding of of bid writing and the politics behind it. I'm not very political.
Have you had conversations with Pete Griffiths at Basketball England about this stuff? What does he say? Because he's a really good guy.
He's awesome.
Knows his stuff.
Pete's been down a couple of times and kind of looked at what we could potentially do and given us some thoughts and ideas. But the one thing they don't have, as everybody knows, is they don't have the money to support. And I think the two places that Pete was telling me that just are very high on everyone's kind of list of people to help are Ipswich and Doncaster. With what Bob's doing up there in terms of just number of people playing our sport.
Do you see it happening, or do you think it's just a long shot in the dark that isn't going to happen anytime soon?
I think it will happen. I think it'll probably happen like the week before I retire, or something like that. That'd be the frustrating thing. I mean, it's got to be very high on our priority list.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to spend too much time kind of whining about it. I've got to get on with my job, and I've got a lot of people under my watch that I've got to look after, and I'm not going to, like a lot of things. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time whining and making excuses. Like we've got a nice court. Our court's lovely. We just need another one next to it. So, it's a priority, but it's not as important as teaching kids to play basketball.
In terms of the aspirations for the club, I'm assuming you've tried to be in Division 1 before with the men, right? And I'm sure there was some stuff around it where I'm sure there was. Remind me what happened with
this. So we finished third. Huddersfield finished second. Derby won it. Then I think Bristol was still in Division 1 at that point. Bristol were going to the BBL, so there was an additional space available. But instead of relegating two teams from Division 1 and putting 3 up, they only relegated 1 from Division 1 and then put 2 up. But then, add insult to injury, Huddersfield folded.
Yeah.
Huddersfield folded. So I was then like, all right, so we're in Division 1. You go, come on, you got to put us up.
And that was when you had the team, right? That was when you had this good team.
We were stacked. Yeah. We were absolutely stacked. And but so were Huddersfield and Derby. So like we missed out on promotion by 1 game. And we had Josh Johnson, Lee Greenan, Tommy Sadler, Aaron Mosley, Luke Maskell-Wright, a young Luke Maskell-Wright, a young Sam Newman, Dylan Costello. We even had like a 15-year-old Caleb Fuller training with that team. It was it's the best men's team we've ever had, and that'd have been a very good Division 1 team because Greenan and Sadler in particular were 2 legit bigs that could have played at a very high level.
Now, when you look at the team, is the intention with the men to get to Division 1? What you think Division 2 is where you need to stay? I
think Division 2 is a really good league for EABL teams. I think with the exception of probably Barking and Charnwood, no one's got anyone that shouldn't be playing in Division 2. It's a very competitive league with some really, really good players. It's been diluted slightly since the visa rules came in, so less teams have kind of import players. Our kind of agenda with our men's teams changed slightly in that we fell on our feet. Tom was employed by the academy, so he was naturally going to play for Ipswich, and Lee had been playing in France and decided he didn't like that, wanted to be at home. Lee's a home bird at heart. He always says there's no place like home. He always says it. So we had kind of these 2 pro-level players that we could build around, but obviously circumstances changed with Tom. Tom's moved on, and I stopped coaching the men, and Lee moved on as well, and Lee's essentially now a pro. So right now, I think having whether they're in Division 2 or Division 1 is not as important as our best kids are getting that opportunity to play at men's level. We still get that nice big crowd, and we still have the local profile. We're not going to have quite the same profile when you don't have those 2 kind of mini celebrities playing for your team, but for guys like Ethan Price and Veron and Ben Winter, and a kind of a handful of senior guys that have played at a decent level, I don't know whether we want to be in Division 1. If we got there, it'd be fine, and we'd be very competitive and we'd do what we can. But what we don't want to do is spend loads of money on players. That money could be being invested in the development of the programme, on coaching, on other things. So I think a more realistic goal for us is whether we want to explore WBBL, because you could probably compete in the WBBL with a similar budget to what our men's team used to run on. Whereas, you know, as brutal as it is and as wrong as it is, you know, male players recruiting men they're expensive.
So do you think longer term we're not likely to see Ipswich ever go into the BBL? Is that not long term aspiration? But the WBBL is something that is more likely.
Yeah, right now I would think that, but that's also in part because we are in a bit of a golden era of young female players in our program.
Yeah, of course.
I think, you know, when I sit down in front of corporate sponsors and when I sit down in front of people and have meetings about facilities, one of the things I'll say is our track record as a program is very, very good in terms of kind of meeting targets and goals. And if we had a facility, then that would give us kind of the motivation to talk about, you know, having a professional team in the town. But, you know, it's chicken and egg, really. You know, we're a very competitive men's team, and our Division 1 women's team, you know, the 2 years since we relaunched the women's program, we've had a bit of a fairy tale, to be honest. And you know, the average age on that team's 17 at the moment. So who knows what the future holds. Obviously,
last year, 2018, was a very special year for the women's program. For those that don't know, can you kind of recap that season for us and and what you did?
Well, we relaunched the women's program. So I'd coached the men for 6 years, and I decided I needed a change. And I'd been coaching the girls in the WEABL. But we'd always only had 6 or 7 girls in the WABL team, and I decided let's enter the women, and we applied to go straight into Division 1, and understandably we're told, you know, you've got to go in at the bottom league, Nick. You can't all these other teams are playing for years, you can't just skip them all. So we played in Division 2, and our team was, you know, very talented team, very young team, but very talented team. And we went undefeated in Division 2, which I wouldn't say we were expecting to go undefeated. We were expecting to get promoted. We had, I think, 6 or 7 national teams players, so should have got fired if we didn't, to be honest. So we won the Division 2, but we went undefeated, and we won the playoffs. But the special thing is that we not only did we win the National Cup, but in order to win the National Cup, we seemed to draw a Division 1 team away in every round. And so we beat Loughborough away, and then we beat Reading away, and then we beat Bristol away, and then we played Essex in the final, which was quite an occasion. And we were down, I think, 17 at one point, and we fought all the way back, and we won it. So we finished the season 23-0. And I've not been shy in kind of reminding people that we did it with a team without an import player. We didn't have one girl that wasn't from our junior programme. The average age on that team was 17 or 18 years old. Like I say, every single one of them was a product of that. They'd all played under 14s. I mean, it's a crazy achievement, and it's an achievement that I don't think many people can relate to, if I'm honest. Jackson does. Jackson and I talk about it all the time. The amount of times when, I mean...
Jackson Gibbons at City London Academy.
Yeah. Jackson and I talk all the time about... people don't know. People don't understand what went into that in the same way that he had that sort of historic season the year before. And it's that season was the best thing I've ever done in my career, because it kind of brought together everything I'd worked for and the programme had worked for God knows how many years. It kind of put it all together, and yeah, I could talk about that for hours, Sam, because people will achieve greater things than that in terms of higher level things, but whether they'll ever feel the sense of satisfaction and pride that I and our programme feels about doing something like that was quite a thrill.
I did want to talk about women's basketball as a whole as well. You know, obviously prior to, I don't know, when was it, 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, when you took over the WEABL team and then sort of started, obviously you were involved with women's basketball from a club sort of senior management level beforehand, but actually getting involved sort of in the trenches, so to speak, coaching the teams was a big switch for you, I assume. And in that time, you've obviously sort of probably in a position that I'm in now, where it's like I know a lot, considerably more about male basketball than I do about female basketball. Kind of what have been the revelations for you, like sort of the surprises maybe coming into it that you weren't expecting, or things that, you know, you look at it, because clearly women's basketball in this country is in a worse shape than men's basketball. What do you think of the sort of the crux of the issues and the biggest things that you found sort of making that transition?
It's kind of difficult because, again, we've always been self-sufficient. I think it's a great question. I mean, I do think that women's basketball in particular is so fragile in terms of the number of people that are invested in it, the number of programs that are producing players consistently, and kind of the pathway and the exit routes. So, kind of one of the things that I realised with women's basketball is there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of people that have been doing it for a very long time that have been doing it very well and had a great deal of success. That are, very, very opinionated and rightly so. And then you've got kind of new people that have got involved and are doing great things, developing players, recruiting players, giving players opportunities, and kind of there just seems to be a little bit of a lack of kind of, I don't want to say the working together thing, because everyone in basketball talks about working together, and I've not met anyone yet that knows what working together means. In the women's game, I think it's kind of fragile. I mean, I'm sure lots of people are expecting me to talk about this, but in the academy setup, you've got a situation where you've got kind of most academies have only got 7 or 8 players, of which 6 or 7 are legit elite level under 19 players, and then you've got a couple certainly one with 20 plus kids, and I know that there's varying opinions on whether that's healthy or not. The under 18 women's national league, we didn't even bother entering a team this year because we said, well, all our under 18s play the WEABL, and the majority of them play Division 1 anyway, so we're not going to play under 18s and only play with 6 all season and that kind of thing. So there's not enough girls playing. Yeah, that's for sure. But there are people that are far more experienced and far more knowledgeable than me that could probably answer those questions better than I can. I mean, the thing that just leaps out to me at the moment is kind of that you've got a great program like Manchester, a great program like Sheffield, struggling to field academy teams. And I think our sport would be better served if where those hotbeds of female basketball talent are, were able to continue to grow their local program.
Why is it that you think the base is so small of female basketball players? Like, why do you think girls in this country just, I don't know, don't pick up a ball as much as boys?
I don't know what the statistics are. Is that the same in every sport? Is that about? I mean, are we just being very narrow-minded and looking at that from a basketball perspective? Yeah. The opportunities aren't the same.
Yeah.
The profile isn't the same. I mean, what you're doing with the Hoopsfix All-Star Classic, having a girls' game, is I think a kind of massive checkpoint in basketball in this country. I'm not kissing your ass. I'm being serious.
I appreciate that.
I'm serious. Like, I've got one of the more talented girls this country's had in a while, and I know she's jumping up and down at this opportunity. And I think the highest profile junior player in this country right now, male or female, is a girl. Yeah. And she's, unfortunately, I've had to coach against her a few times this year and been on the receiving end of just how wonderful a basketball player she is.
Holly Winterburn.
Yeah. And I think that, what you're doing is going to give these girls profile and give women's game profile and may inspire other girls. It kind of goes back to my community theory that, are we being inspired? Are we sending inspirational people in to work with the girls? Are the girls being valued as much as the boys? I don't know the figures and the facts. I hear horror stories about the amount of money that's invested in the girls' game. The women just won a medal at the Commonwealth Games, so that that's something that we need to kind of pin up somewhere and say, go and be like them.
The interesting thing about all of this for me is that, comparatively, contextually, the women out of the UK perform better than the men. We've got more women playing at high-level schools in the States, the Division 1 schools or whatever. We've got more, the GB women's team, are performing better at international level. like you just said, you've got the England girls team winning the Commonwealth Games medal. So it's like the success is there, but then it's not translating to having. It's like the very best of the base are very good, but there just isn't a big enough base, you know. And like I said, I don't know what the solution is. But I know that, you know, I've obviously floated. I'm trying to do this big article about women's basketball at the moment. I've spoken to a number of different people about the game here, and I don't know if I've necessarily got answers. All I know is that from everyone I speak to, whose opinions I respect massively, it's just an absolute state.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the answers either. I know that, like, for example, our under-14 girls coach, he's awesome. He's a volunteer, very successful guy, very intelligent guy, volunteer basketball coach. It costs him money to coach for us. His daughter plays on the team, but he is completely and utterly inspired. 15 girls at under-14s. The interesting thing will be if all 15 of them are still playing when they're under-16s. That will be, for me, ask me in 2 years' time this same question, because I think that will be a really interesting case study for us as a club.
Yeah.
Is he couldn't really be doing a better job. Again, inspiration before technical, but he's very good tactically and technically as well. And how many of those girls are still playing at under-16s? How many of those girls then come to our academy? How many of those girls then make the transition into senior basketball, university basketball, or beyond? That will be, for me, where I can look at it and go, well, it worked in Ipswich, you know, and I can do the whole, well, if we can do it, everyone else can do it kind of speech.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to how many programs put their better coaches at the younger age groups as well. Because boys will pick up a ball and go and play on the park. Girls tend not to do that as much.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was talking with Jackson Gibbons about this stuff, and he was just saying, you know, sometimes he actually has to remind the girls to go and play, like, where it's just, you know, it's very different to the boys. Like,
well, Michael Ball told me something fascinating years ago. He said that he paid for a subscription for the players to watch WNBA. He's like, because you don't watch basketball, you know, and it was really interesting that it's not a new problem. It's not a new problem that we're having in our sport.
Yeah.
It's, you know, what do you know about the game? You know, who's your favourite team? Who's your favourite player? Because with boys, you can say to a boy, whether it's good advice or bad advice, go and practice that stuff that James Harden does, and they will. They might practice it wrong, you know, or whatever, but that's not necessarily as easy on the girls' side.
Yeah, 100%.
But the other thing is this, and I know Jackson gave the analogy of holding them by the scruff of the neck, and it's a brilliant analogy. And mine's more brutal than that. Mine is always, when coaching guys, you spend 90% of your time coaching boys, telling them that they're not as good as they think they are. 90% of your time coaching girls is spent telling them they are better than they think they are. And so that's a major element of it.
Yeah. When you talk about the top players that have come through your program, you know, maybe ones that you personally enjoyed coaching the most or being around the most, but then also like the elite of the elite, you know, who are the ones that you like to talk about as the examples?
I mean, I've loved coaching every kid. In terms of the best kids, most valuable, best and most valuable are two very different things. I've got players that I could talk about that I think that will go the furthest. I mean, I think Caleb Fuller's going to go a very, very long way. But
he's currently at UC Davis.
Yeah, and you know, I'll be very quick to point out that Caleb did a year with Barking Abbey, and that progressed him enormously after. Caleb's the first kid I ever felt outgrew our program, if truth be told. And I'm sure, you know, that other people will agree with that. You know, and that's not to knock our program. He was significantly better than any of the other boys of his generation.
Yeah.
So we didn't have kind of other guys around him of the same level. I've always got a very special place in my heart for Lee Greenan, purely because I kind of think he was the trailblazer as a player for us, because lots of things happened, a lot of opportunities opened up for me because I had Lee. You know, a lot of high-level coaches, both in the UK and overseas, wanted to be my friend because I had this 7-footer who plays for me. So, you know, Lee, Lee is now playing at the level where everyone wanted him to be at when he was 21. People are very quick to forget or don't know that Lee didn't take basketball seriously till he was 15. So when he was having, European scouts and NCAA Division 1 scouts ringing him up in the middle of the night and people calling his mum, and he'd only been playing a couple of weeks. do you know what I mean? So, Lee's one of the players that I'm kind of very fond of. There's almost too many to mention because I don't want to offend people. I'm incredibly attached to some of the girls that we won the cup with, and that is in part for kind of off-court experiences and journeys that life-changing stuff that happens, which I won't go into graphic detail about, but I'm a lot more than a basketball coach to some of these players. I mean, Harriet Wellham is kind of our poster girl right now in terms of our program, and she's just an awesome human being and a phenomenal player, and she's now a coach, and she's I think she's going to be a great servant to our sport. Most talented kid I've ever coached from Ipswich is probably Esther Little, and she's probably got the highest ceiling.
She's got 2 more years with you now, right?
She's
just reclassified.
But it's an incredibly dangerous thing to put that kind of pressure on a 17-year-old girl or boy. Ethan Price has got a lot of potential. No one knew about him except for you, Sam, a year ago.
Do you know what? The funny thing is, I always say to you, obviously we had a spot, and I was speaking to you, and you were just like, you have to put him in. He's not on any radar. He hasn't been. I think he'd been on the national team long list, but hadn't quite made it to camp or something, and then kind of dropped off the national team. And it was like, if you put him in, you will be the first. And I was just like, let's do it. And obviously, you put him in. He did well in the game, and obviously he's very athletic. And then this year, just had this breakout year, and I'm like, actually makes me look pretty smart. Little do they know I've got no clue, and it's just all you. But I appreciate that.
I mean, if you see him working on a daily basis, Ethan and Esther, you see them work. I see them every day, and both of them do stuff. I mean, Esther does stuff that I've never seen a girl do before, and that's, she's really exciting to coach. When you've got a girl coaching and you're like, right, in 6 months' time we want you to dunk that, it's pretty cool. Veron's very exciting. There's just so many of them. Ashley Pink, who's out now in Barry University in the States. It's one of the debates we have in the office all the time. What's your all-time starting 5 coach? But if I had one game of all the kids I've ever coached, and someone said, right, gun to your head, game for your life, there's no way I'm taking anyone other than Harriet Wellham.
Nice. There was 2 things that you said that I wanted to pick up on that I quickly wrote down. One was I did want to talk about big kids because it seems like, again, we're talking about a small town, but you seem to be able to find these massive kids, and everyone needs bigs, right? It's always the way. It's like guards are a dime a dozen, but to find bigs are much more difficult. And I remember we had a conversation about years ago on the phone, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said something along the lines of, I'll just be walking around in the supermarket, and if there's a kid that's big, I'll just go up to him and be like, have you ever played basketball before? And you try and get him in the club. So kind of like, why do you think you've been able to find, a lot of, very, big kids that you've then obviously turned into basketball talents?
Big kids get typecasted, particularly in primary school. If I had £1 for every time a PE teacher said, I'll say, that kid's big, he could play or she could play. But not very coordinated. And I'm like, I could strangle that teacher. I'm like, do you know what it's like to be bigger than everybody else and self-conscious? And the assumption that big people are more confident is a myth. Big people, a lot of the time, are more self-aware, more nervous, more anxious. So in the early days, my thing was, we kind of launched this initiative, and it was called Don't Slouch. And the idea was, big kids get taken for granted, pointed at, laughed at, talked about, bullied, for want of a better phrase, for being big. And basketball and a basketball court can be a place where they can share their size with other giants, and it goes back to kind of that inspiration, make them feel good about themselves. And, it's genuine, it's real. And it helps because I'm 6'5", so I can, and I'm not skinny. So I walk into a room and people tend to notice that I'm there. And so if I'm in a school setting, and I see a big kid, I'll invite them to the Centre of Excellence, which we have, which is an under-10 session, regardless of whether they can barely walk. And I'll say to them, "You got a gift. You've got a gift, right? Being big, it's a gift. Trust me." And I get away with that because I'm big. So I'm like, "Trust me. Come and give basketball a try. I've never played basketball before. It doesn't matter. Come and give it a try." And then I'll be like, "Here's a letter. Give it to your family. I'll speak to the teacher. This kid, I'm telling you, I've done this a million times. I want this kid to come and try and play basketball." And they come to basketball, and you make them realise that they're important. But what you also do is in our case, we're able to introduce them to an Ethan or a Lee or a Dylan Johns, these giant 6'10 plus guys, or the girls. This is Maya Price, she's 6'2". This is Esther, she's 6'2". Do you know what I mean? People look at them funny because they're big, but she's got a Great Britain tracksuit. You know. So that's one thing that we do. We make them, the old turn a negative into a positive. The other thing is, I have literally walked through Morrison's and seen a massive kid, and I've gone, I'm like, "Excuse me," I said, "this is like going to be the weirdest part of your day, but I'm a basketball coach, and you look like you could be a basketball player. Have you ever tried playing basketball?" And they'll say, "No. Like, here's my card, here's my number. Like, I'm not, there's no ulterior motive here for me." Yeah. And I've had kids show up. Dylan Johns came through the door because he thought that there was a rugby session. And I was like, no. It's basketball, but you're not leaving. And he ended up having a Division 1 college career, played for the national teams, played professionally. And I just think it's, if you're in the primary schools, you're in the lower school, it's just seeking them out. I was walking through Coppleston in September, and there was a big girl in the corridor, and I was like, "You, basketball?" They're like, "Never played." I said, "You do now." And it's, I don't know, it's something that I get a lot of stick for again. It must be the soil down in Suffolk, all these giants that you find. But listen, what we've always been able to do is, whether they're tall or athletic, or they're just skilled, what we've always had a knack for is, if we do have a kid that we think can go far, we do a really good job with them, and we make them a priority. And I've got every single kid's name in our program, community kid, like 800 names, and I've got flagged up which ones are on my radar, and I've got them as young as 9. Which ones this kid's going to be this big, or we think this kid's going to be this good, and we do prioritise the kids whose life could be altered by our sport. I mean, I think that kind of probably sums up the big story, but also the kind of life-changing stuff that we try to do in our sport. There's one of the big kids we had was a kid called Lawrence Watcham, who you may remember. And Lawrence was, we found him I got a phone call from Jacob Swift, who was one of my former players, who was doing work experience at a special school for kids with behaviour problems. And he goes, "Nick, there's a kid here who is bigger than you." And I said, "Oh, how old is he?" He says, 11. And I was like, "You're joking." He said, "No, he's 11. He's massive." And I said, "Right." And I go, "What it takes, you get into our game this weekend." Kid walks in. He's like 6'7", but about 23 stone. He's just a giant, like a professional wrestler.
I think I know who you mean.
Well, we published a couple of weeks ago a video of our under-13 national title, and he's on there. And he's just this humongous kid. And Lawrence ended up in mainstream education. He got in shape, grew to 6'11", and played for the national team because of basketball. So going back to your question about the success story, he's probably our greatest success story. Because when I'm dead and gone and I'm standing at the pearly gates, and if there is someone there who says, "Justify coming in," that can be because we won.
Yeah. Do you think that the country could benefit from some sort of nationwide talent ID based on physical attributes? Because I'm sure they used to do something like that. Didn't they do
Tall and talented?
Because that's how Zach Wells was found.
He was a rower, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I think
boxer.
So.
Was he a boxer? Yeah.
Yeah, there was a rower as well. I'm not trying to think who it was.
But surely it would be possible. It would be within the realms of possibility for the federation affiliated with Sporting England or whatever, to go into primary schools and be like, obviously there are some kids that are late, suddenly have a growth spurt that you can't predict, but there's some that are clearly showing that they're going to be huge at a young age. And, you get them into basketball at sort of 10, 11 years old. Like, I feel like that would potentially change a lot, and it should be doable.
It's very doable because, again, we've done it. So the Don't Slouch initiative could easily be formalised and rolled out nationally. Yeah. It could easily, and it's just an anti-bullying campaign. It's what kids get bullied for all sorts of reasons, including being tall or bigger than everybody else. Yeah. Let's give those kids an outlet. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I think, I'd lead it. I'd lead that. If someone wants to come forward and say, yeah, what's it going to take? I'll drive the length of the country to go to a meeting to do that, because even if it produces one good basketball player, it's going to save a hell of a lot of people's self-esteem, and that's really important. Yeah.
The other thing I did want to talk about very briefly was letting players go for a third year to another academy and stuff, and obviously that is something that we hear all the time. People want to hold on to their players. People don't want to let guys go on to other programs and stuff. And how do you feel about that? Like the state of things in this country with kind of, I guess, programs holding on to players. Maybe in a situation where they're not going to develop as well because they're maybe not having opportunities to play senior level or whatever, and allowing them to go on to other places. Like, I think one of the analogies that people always bring up to me is like football. In football, if you're a small community club or whatever, and someone signs with Arsenal, everyone celebrates it. It's good job. But in this country, it's very much like, no. With basketball, we want to keep them so that we can take the credit for them. They've come through our program. Don't want to let them go on to somewhere where they might be in a better situation to develop.
It's a minefield. Obviously, we all know that Caleb went and did a third year at Barking, and for those that are close to the situation will know that Lloyd and I are very, very good friends. Yeah. So there's no kind of going behind anyone's back. There was none of that. But when Caleb first came and spoke to me about it, I didn't take it very well, and I'll admit that. And Caleb and I have only spoken briefly about it. I didn't take it very well because I've got a very big ego. But at least I'm big enough to admit it, because I think every coach has that. Yeah. I'm just saying it. Because it was a kick in the teeth at the time, because you're like, man, you've been with me since you were 9 or 10 years old. We're going to be really bad if you're not here. But then, once I kind of got over that initial emotional adrenaline rush, I was like, he's got to go. It's a great situation for him, and he was proved absolutely right. But there is more to that situation as a generic situation. The Caleb thing is an example of two programs that have a history of working together, two coaches that have, I play against Lloyd, under 18s, man. Yeah. So there's a lot of trust and respect there. Where it's not great, and whether this is regardless of whether it's a third year or going at 16, is greed. And whether you're taking that player for the right reason for them, or you're taking them for you, because outside of a couple of situations, most of the programs can offer roughly the same thing. So I don't think that Caleb going to do a third year at Barking was the wrong thing. I think it was absolutely the right thing. He went on to win MVP of the final, got a scholarship that he probably wouldn't have got if he'd have stayed in Ipswich. So that's great, but I also think people have to have an understanding, and I'm not saying this is the right thing, so I've got to be very careful how I word this because people will have a field day, academies are a business. People have to realise that and not lie. Yeah. Don't pretend that it's not.
You get money per player, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So by a player leaving and doing really well at that programme and then winning, and you losing because that player left, you then struggle to attract more players because you maybe didn't make the playoffs or you didn't have as glamorous of a season. So there's a knock-on effect. Yeah. So there is also a responsibility of recognition. And so I know people think I self-promote. I don't self-promote. We as a program have to shout about our successes, because we need to remind people we did this. Yeah. And if you were to come here, you could be part of that. Our girls program speaks for itself currently in terms of that kind of thing. But I've had coaches go behind my back and email players. and you don't want to know what went through my head. But I lose my temper. I'm like, how dare you?
Yeah.
But if it's done in the right way, and I think that.
And doing it in the right way just needs to be a transparent process.
I just think that there needs to be open communication between the two coaches involved. The player needs to be honest about it. But also, we can't have a situation where every kid goes to one or two programs, because then we lose the competition.
Yeah.
So it's not as... I think it's naive to think it's just as straightforward as everyone's got to always do exactly what's best for the player and disregard all of the other things involved. Because obviously you have to put the player first, and we always do.
Yeah.
But people are allowed to have differing opinions on what's right for that player, and people are also allowed to have, circumstances do come into it. What if a player leaving costs a program the ability to recruit anyone the following year, and therefore that program dies, and then the club don't have an exit route for their... Do you know what I mean? And that's an extreme example.
Yeah. Do you think a solution to all of this would be more central control from the federation? Because I've maintained for a long time, I feel like that is where if unfortunately federation seems to get involved with things they don't need to get involved with, and the things that I feel like they could actually do some good, they aren't involved with. So for example, if the federation was just to outline, okay, we're going to have some regional institutes of basketball. This is where the best talent goes. We're going to have, I don't know, let's say 6 or whatever across the country, like evenly spread geographically. So they've each got a catchment area, and they say to the players in a similar way. Well, this is kind of exactly what was meant to happen with the ABL. In some ways, is that then it's like, if you want to be selected for national teams and stuff, these are the programs you've got to go to, because they're going to get X amount of strength conditioning, X amount of physio support, X amount of coaching hours, individuals, and that is clearly it's there's no sitting on the fence about it. Like, Basketball England or British Basketball Federation, whoever you want to say, are going to say these are the institutions that these are now, not their own brand. These are the GB regional institutes. This is what we are now backing. This is where we're sending our players to, and that's the way it goes. Surely that would solve a lot of the issues in terms of the infighting, because everyone knows where they stand. There's no there's a lot of. I maintain that one of the worst things that I was involved with the academy leagues, or not worst things, but one of the sort of maybe in retrospect I would have done differently, is I think the ABL has been given too much significance, right? In a way where genuinely I think a lot of the players believe that it's on the same level as the EABL, right? And as a result of that, they think they're a lot better than they are. They think they're putting up ridiculous numbers, and they just don't understand the levels. It's almost given it too much significance. Whereas, in retrospect, I don't know what I would do with it. I understand the rationale for doing it in the first place, but actually I would somehow do something to make it clear that this is a second-tier competition, and you don't get what you get at any ABL school. I'm ranting a little bit here, but do you think that the federation's involvement, clearly delineating the levels, clearly delineating the pathway, where you go if you're an elite player, where you go if you're going to do the participation stuff, would help solve that situation?
It would. I think the problem is there's certain things that are out of their control. Anyone can go to a sixth form. Anyone with a level 2 coaching qualification can go and check in at a school reception, get their little lanyard badge, and go and have a meeting with the head of sixth form or the principal of that school, and say, I'm a basketball coach, I run a basketball club. If I can run a basketball academy here, you'll get 10 kids into sixth form this year that you wouldn't have got otherwise.
That would be worth X amount to the school.
But that's 50,000 quid. And you got to pay me to do it, but you don't pay me 50 grand a year. So you're going to make money out of having me run this basketball academy. All I need in exchange is access to a minibus, a court, some kit, competition fees, etc. And they're going to say yes. And we have them darted all over this country. And what Basketball England can do nothing about that. So we can't, and we shouldn't hold them account to that. Different people have different opinions about whether, by giving profile to the league in which those schools can then enter, we're encouraging it.
Yeah.
And I know I was heavily involved. As you and I remember pacing around my garden, 7-8 years ago, on the phone to you when we talked about the EABL and the concept of the EABL before it was called the EABL, and the idea at that point that what was there in those days? I'm guessing there was Filton College, which became SGS, Noel Baker School, Loretto, Barking Abbey, Hackney, Ipswich. There was like 8, wasn't there?
Yeah,
8 academies.
Yeah.
Reading, that people went to. If you wanted to play basketball, there's now 15 or 16 elite academies,
which is way too many.
And then how many teams are in the ABL? I mean,
way too many.
And so if I'm a kid who wants to go to an academy, where do I go to get the information on?
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying is the basketball need to make it clear. Like that's where it's like whether it's some type of, I don't know what it is. There just needs to be. I think basketball England at times, well, on the British, but everyone's too scared of upsetting people. That's the problem. That's just general British culture, isn't it? It's like let's do the thing that's going to upset the least people, and please everyone. When actually, I feel like that is partly what's got us in the situation we're in today, where it's like, no, do you know what? You need to get off the fence, and you need to say, do you know what? These places, based on their track record, based on what they've done, they've proven it, and that's why we're now saying we are going to give X amount of resource or whatever and put these up on a pedestal, and we're going to send all the players there. But that's, obviously that just hasn't happened.
I think that there's conversations to be had about that with the right people round a table, where that's the only topic of discussion.
Yeah.
And I would be happy to go to that discussion, and I hope you would, and because I know that having built a program from the ground up, I know how it feels for these guys that are building programs that in their mind think they're doing a great job, and in many cases they are, that they want to have their players stay with them because it's worked up until that point.
Yeah.
I also know what it's like to run what I would consider now to be one of the higher profile programs, and see players that are in a program that can't offer what we can offer, and I'm like, that kid really should be moving on now, but I don't want to break the code of conduct to go and ring the parents or you do the old-fashioned car park conversation and all that kind of. So I kind of see both sides. Yeah. I don't know what the solution is. I'm truth be told, I think there should probably be 8 to 10 academies, and that should be the EABL, and that should be the one that has a ton of investment in it. And if you want to be a top-level player, these are the 10 programs that are well-resourced and well-funded, and these are the top coaches. But I also know how I'd feel if someone to turn around to me and say, "No, Nick, you're the 11th program, so you're not going to get that support," because I always say, and people might not like me for saying it, but I'll hang my ability to develop a basketball player up against anyone's. But then every coach feels like that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, there's clearly needs to be some things done. We're going on 90 minutes, so probably need to wrap up semi-soonish. There was definitely one thing I did want to touch upon was your work with national teams. Obviously, you were involved with the under-16s, which is the first team to get promotion to Division A in 2011.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And aside from that, you did some work with the 18s as well, and you were involved with the Division A. So yeah, kind of, I guess, reflecting on the experience as a whole with national teams, how was it? Why are you not involved in the same way anymore? I guess any sort of stories that stick out that kind of you like to reflect upon.
Well, I mean, 2011, I was essentially the apprentice coach. Simon Fisher, who...
he's now with British wheelchair basketball, right?
Yeah. Simon Fisher, in my opinion, is missed massively in the basketball community. He's somebody that we need, we miss. Very dear friend of mine. Just never done a bad thing to anybody.
Yeah, top guy.
Simon invited me because... through my relationship with Matt Johnson, Matt introduced me to Simon, and Simon took me as his kind of apprentice coach in the 2011 team, and I learned a ton from being with Simon. Simon's assistant was Carl Brown, and he also had Sean Reed around, and it was like a constant sort of TV show. Those three guys together, it was hilarious. Sean and Carl were like a double act. It was just some of the best times, late night conversations, stuff I've been around. obviously a very, very talented team.
And that was the golden 95 generation, right?
Yeah,
So
Kingsley Akora, Luke Nelson,
Terrell Isaacs, Dwayne Orija,
Mo.
Yeah.
So
Mo Sholawade.
Ben Mead, I'm going to shout out Ben.
Ben Mead, yeah.
Of course.
Sam Round.
Yeah. So great team. We won every game on the way to the final, and then we lost in the final. And it was just an amazing journey. I was kind of learning my trade a little bit. I've been around national teams with Tim Lewis and Matt in 2005, and again with Simon in 2007. But this was my first kind of formal involvement. And I kind of... Simon was brilliant at running a staff and making you feel like a family. And I use that kind of term a lot when I'm coaching, and you have to when you're in little old Ipswich. There was very much an us against the world mentality with that coaching staff, and watching Carl coach defence was amazing. I just took so much from watching Carl operate. 3 years later, Carl was the...
Make sure you face the mic.
Sorry.
You're twisting a little bit, yeah.
3 years later, Carl was the head coach of the 18s in Division A, and I was appointed. So I wasn't the apprentice anymore. I was the appointed assistant coach with Carl in Division A, and I had a very different experience.
Because we were in Turkey?
Yeah, in Konya.
Which age group was that? Was that
under 18s?
Was it 95s though? Or
96s.
It was 96s.
96s, bless their little hearts, had to follow the 95s. So every time the 95s got promoted, the 96s got them relegated. And it was rough for that group because they always had to play in Division A. But in 2014, I remember sitting at the airport, and we were in this kind of lounge, and there was ourselves, the Croatians. I think Bosnia were there, and England, and Bosnia had Jordan brand tracksuits and uniforms, and Croatia were in Nike, and we were in Zotti, and we had our Fruit of the Loom t-shirts on, and I remember thinking, we're screwed. And I mean, we were playing against NBA players, guys that are in the Sabonis and Dragon Bender, and these guys are playing in the NBA now, and like Sabonis is a legit NBA starter, and we're prepping these games. I remember like, oh God, Nick, scout, can you scout him? I'm like, I just don't feel like my scouting is going to work here. But do you know what? I will say this, and that was when Vladan was still involved, and Vladan sort of looming constantly around the programme.
Vladan was the former sort of pathway programme manager, talent ID guy. Yeah,
and vastly knowledgeable, great guy, but, it was like having, the head teacher in your lesson all the time. And
helicopter parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were totally out of our depth. We struggled. I learned so much from Carl. The biggest thing I learned was that I'm an absolutely shocking assistant coach. But it was also kind of those two experiences that made me kind of be so opinionated about the development of the academy leagues. And in the early days, way before kind of finals in arenas and hundreds of people, I was pushing for video analysis and the facilities and the means for us to scout, because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. My scouting was left-handed, right-handed, can they shoot? How are we going to defend them in the post? What are we going to do in pick and roll? And I mean, I got to work with Dan Petts, who's over in Spain, working in the ACB. And I was like, man, this is real basketball. And I kind of got exposed to all that stuff and thought, do you know what? We as the professional workforce in the UK have a responsibility to get better at this stuff. Me more than anyone, because I'm terrible. And I kind of vowed that I'd never be an assistant coach again. Not because my ego, quite the opposite, because I'm terrible. Absolutely terrible at that job, and I want to get better at it. But
why are you terrible?
You
need to be the main guy, or
I think there's an element of I'm an alpha personality, and I've been the master of my own empire for nearly 20 years now. But I think more so, I know what I want when I'm the head coach, and I think I might be a good assistant coach. But Carl and I Carl's basketball knowledge and everything is vast, and I think that my skill set didn't suit Carl, and that's my fault, not his. That's for sure. But I think that was one of the best and worst experiences of my life, because I was out there in Turkey. I just didn't want to be there. by the end of it. I was like, I'm not enjoying this. I don't think I'm doing a very good job. We're losing. I think I'm frustrating the staff because I'm making it obvious that I don't think I'm doing a great job.
Yeah.
So I kind of vowed that was me done with national teams because I didn't want to do it anymore. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I've got 2 beautiful little children at home, and going away with the national teams after a long basketball season is rough.
Yeah.
I remember in 2011, my son learnt like 5 new words while I was away, and I missed it. And so I kind of said I didn't want to do it anymore. But then since then, there's an itch there again that I want to scratch at some stage. I kind of say every September and October I want to coach national teams. And then I get to March, and I'm like, I'm not going to apply.
Yeah.
I'm not going to apply. And right now, if I was to apply, I'd probably apply on the girls' side, which is strange considering, I'm still relatively new to the women's game.
Yeah. It's funny, I feel like a lot of people don't, well, I guess probably the people that are involved with the game realise, but a lot of people don't realise just how antisocial being involved with basketball is, in the sense that especially if you're practicing every night or whatever, you've got games on the weekend, like you don't have the time. I know obviously I got games on the weekend to film or whatever, or to go and check them out, and it's just tough to then to have any time for anything else. And I think that's one of the reasons that the game struggles, because it's like when people aren't necessarily being rewarded. If you're a player and you're not getting paid, you're a coach, you're not getting paid a lot. A lot of it's volunteer based, and and your wife or your partner or your husband or whatever is like, well, what is our family getting out of this aside from you being away from us all the time?
Yeah.
It's hard to make the case, right?
Well, it's one of the big things that I've said, and I think I've probably tweeted about it, because I think I've tweeted about everything at one stage or another. Our coaches are getting younger, and that's great, because when I started coaching, I was a lot younger than everybody else. Very few guys in their early 20s were coaching. Now it's really trendy to be a coach. And my concern with this kind of investment into the young coaches all the time is what happens when they have a family. Because I can speak from experience. I'm 38 years old now. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old and a wife, and my life is put on hold from September to April, May, every year, like you say. I've missed wedding anniversaries. I've missed children's birthdays. Things that I'm never going to get back. And I say to friends all the time, whether they're basketball friends or otherwise, about having kids, I'm like, you got to be ready, because trust me. My wife is the most amazing woman in the world. And I say that for many reasons, but the single biggest reason why is she is so unconditionally supportive of my career, not because it pays the mortgage, not because it pays the bills, but because she loves me and she knows what it means to me and what I mean to the people that I work with. I'm not going to pretend that that's not a factor. So she has to essentially share me, and we have our end of season dinner every year in May, and she'll get presented with a bunch of flowers by the players, who will say, thanks for letting us have him for the last 9 months. And that goes a long way. But the reason why I say that is this really isn't a lifestyle that's suited to people with a young family and people with other commitments. I don't see my friends a great deal. When I do see my friends, they say to me, what have you been up to? And I'm like, man, don't ask me that. It's like being at work.
Yeah.
So I got a ton of kind of experiences that I'd share with young coaches on, get as much learning in as you can now. Because once you have a family, you ain't going to be going off to Slovenia for 4 days to watch coaches. You're gonna be going to, Pleasurewood Hills and Lowestoft, or, and pushing a pram around a lake or something like that.
Yeah. So final question to wrap up. The future of Ipswich Basketball Club, where do you see the club going? What do you want sort of in the immediate future, I guess, looking ahead to sort of next season and then sort of next 3 to 5 years? What do you want to happen?
Do you know what, Sam? It's a question I get asked all the time. It's probably the question my mates do ask me when I go and have a beer with them. I think just get better. Just get better at what we do. I'd love for a sugar daddy to come in and give me some money, not me personally, but the program some money, so I could offer a full-time coaching position or 2 to guys like Adam Davies, Matt Harbour, guys that have graduated. I don't mean specifically those 2 guys. Be nice, but
poaching, tampering.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of we are a stepping stone for people. We're a rung on the ladder, and I do think that the next step would be to be able to provide more employment for people and grow this program even bigger, because I'm the only full-time person in our program, and I'm 38 now, man. I'm ready to start training up someone to inherit this. I've got 20 years left, I think, but not much more than that.
Perfect. That's a great place to leave it. Nick, thank you so much for coming through. It's much appreciated.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Sam.